Thank you so much, sir, for taking out time for all of us and for completing the moment. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us virtually. And now, moving on to the second plenary session for the day, ladies and gentlemen. This session is going to be about bargaining financial frauds, capabilities mapped to deal with volume, velocity, and scale of digitalization and exposures. To discuss about this topic, we have with us Mr. Manmeet Dhody, the Chief Technology Officer from Payments Paytm. We also have Dr. Nandkumar Saravade, the former CEO, Reserve Bank Information Technology Private Limited, Mr. Rivi Varghese, founder, CEO, Chairman, CustomerXPs and Clarify, and also Mr. Amit Vasava, IPS, DCP, Cybercrime, Gujarat Police. I request all the panelists to allow some time for Q&A as well after your session with the audience at the end. So over to the presenters, please.
So, do I go first? So, I am Amit Osava. I head the cybercrime branch at Ahmedabad. And from my experience investigating several cybercrimes, I would just like to share you in very brief what are the difficulties that police faces. The main problem is the over dependence on digital evidence. Compared to the conventional crimes, we here do not have any witnesses, we do not have circumstantial evidences, and most of the time the evidences are not up to the standards on which the law of the country is made on. The law of the country says you have to prove a crime beyond reasonable doubt. But in most of the cyber crime cases, the evidences are just that that person had a phone in which there used to be a SIM card, again on someone else's name, which had committed this crime, right? So that is a huge issue, and if the banks are also represented here, I would also like to share that online opening of account is very easy, and there is no KYC done at least for 6 months in most of the banks. So this gives ample time for the cyber criminals to get the proceeds of crime in that accounts. There are several cyber hubs in the country where operating for law enforcement agency is very difficult. Most of the most of the time, it is concentrated in the rural villages and towns, small towns. So Mewat is one area, Jamtara and around are another area. Lot of boys from UP and Bihar have also picked up cybercrime in a big way. Locating and arresting cyber criminal is a huge challenge because we don't know that person, how he looks like, what is his name. Only thing is that he is carrying this particular phone. So that is also difficult. There is no central national database of cyber crime that have been committed. So a cyber criminal gang might have committed like hundreds of crime, but only in a few of them actual action is taken, and other crimes go undetected. Recovery of proceeds of crime is again a huge problem. Borderless nature of crime is a huge challenge because for many of the data we are dependent on foreign companies, especially US companies. So we have to take the route of mutual legal assistance treaty, which is very cumbersome. Overall, what I feel is I've been to Israel for 8 days, and what I found is there is a huge, cooperation and synergy between law enforcement, intelligence, education department, and the industry, which I believe in India is a bit lacking. So if we focus on interacting more, then this will be a huge success. I would also like to focus on use of malware for cyber crimes. There is this very elaborate crime called SIM card swapping, which uses malware, and we have been able to reverse engineer a few of these malwares and prevented several companies from getting cheated and remove the malware from their systems. So companies need to be aware. Data theft is and data leak is a huge issue. In one of the cases, we have recovered 40 lakh user ID passwords, credentials of huge e-commerce companies like Flipkart, Brand Factory, Data Click, and AGO. Right. So that is also a huge problem, and uh, Aadhaar-enabled payment system, right? We believe biometrics is quite safe, but it is very easy to replicate and make a duplicate rubber copy of my thumb. It is done through the same machine which makes the common office rubber stamp, right? So this is a huge challenge. Once a person gets my impression of the thumb, that person can take away all my money without having the credentials or even having to give OTP. So this is a huge challenge. Lot of threat is coming from China also. Chinese gangs have come up with very systematic and elaborate plans of cheating our citizens in the form of loan application, part-time job frauds, investment application, and gambling. So, in one of the cases, we detected one investment application and we found a flow of 50 crore rupees in just a month's time. And there were 100 plus such applications when we had started investigation. So, that is a huge national security issue as well. And overall, I believe cyber hygiene, cyber etiquettes must be taught to people. And here in Gujarat, we are in talks with the education department also to include such things from the school syllabus itself. So this is something that I wanted to share. I believe I have consumed the time I was allocated to. So I'll look forward to interacting further.
Right. Good morning, everybody. Sorry for the late joining. Wanted to thank Amit to take the first opening over. Typically, and I'm saying this as a former police officer, the police always come in the end. But I thought it will be important for the police to come in the beginning because we have to start from the problem and go to the solution. And nobody sees the problems as clearly or as starkly as police do because it is the last line of defense. And after all other lines have failed, people go to the police and the police have to deliver not only get the money back in this context, but also be sensitive and then the criminal justice system has to do its job. But that's a long story. But thanks again, Amit, for giving us a flavor of how things are. I think coming back to the theme of this session, I think burgeoning financial frauds is something which all of us know anecdotally. Unfortunately, the data on this is little scarce because of various reasons, and that's something I have been shouting from rooftops for some time now. That we need better measurement of the problem to really then make a dent into it. Otherwise, we'll continue to flail in the darkness and not sure whether what we're doing is really affecting the problem or not. But when I saw the DSCI title and the tagline, I thought that let me add one more feature to it. The velocity volume definitely is there, but variety is also there, and I think Amit touched on some of the variety. So financial frauds typically we tend to look at as payment frauds because those are the ones where the money disappears and the victim also comes to know very quickly, and they make a lot of noise. But loan frauds where the banks are duped because of the new models of how KYC is being done, how credit underwriting is being done, and relying on data which may or may not be very reliable. And that is the nature of fintech, of course, to take risk. But what we see again is people who are very focused on building things, they don't really realize that there are risks to it. And I think Amit gave a brilliant example of the AEPS as the the kind of frauds are happening there. And I read this recently. I think in Delhi or Haryana, a gang was busted, which was basically collecting fingerprint impressions from, I think, the registration office data. As you may know, if you have done a mortgage registration, fingerprints are taken, and those fingerprints are available on the document, which can be downloaded by anybody because of the transparency requirements, etc., that which are there. Same thing had happened in Telangana a few months ago. And biometrics, as we know, is once compromised, never can be restored. So the risks of building systems which are not really based on good assumptions, not based on good real life data, can create a lot of cleanup work, a lot of reputation issues, a lot of trust issues, and I think as security professionals we have to pay attention to them. But I think let's come back to the panel theme, and I'm very happy to have three very diverse perspectives in this panel. Amit has already given his point of view from the law enforcement point of view, but we also have Manmeet from Paytm, whose job it is to build more secure processes, more create awareness among the users, etc. And we also have Rivi, who actually builds products which will help everybody do their work better. So I would now like to call upon Manmeet to share his perspective, slightly upstream to what Amit spoke, and tell us about how he sees things from his point of view.
Sure. Thank you, Nat. Thank you so much for having me here, and it's a real honor to be here. So, we'll just talk about the problem and, what we see on the fintech side of the world. Obviously, over the last 2 years or so, especially post-COVID, we've seen a huge move towards digitization. Online payments have just gone through the roof. There are a lot of financial transactions which are now happening in a digital manner, and there's a big movement, in this direction. And as a result, it becomes very, very critical for us, to protect ourselves from financial frauds. And for us as a fintech company, it becomes very, very critical to make sure our customers are protected, whether they are end consumers, whether they are merchants, all stakeholders, right? I mean, it becomes our responsibility to do that. Now, what we've seen in terms of financial frauds, we've seen multiple types of things happen. As and I'll just probably call out a few of them, and also call out a few things that we've been doing to counter some of these things. Um, we've actually seen, starting from, if I really divide this, right, there are 4 or 5 big categories, and since we'll focus on fraud primarily today, I leave out the anti-money laundering and disruption in services, which also happens, right? But because probably that's a little beyond the scope of our discussion today, I'll focus more on what kind of frauds happen. One of, and these are, I'll probably take the top 4 or 5 or 6 categories. One thing that we've seen is, we have a lot of phishing attempts which happen, right? And now when you talk about phishing attempts, they can happen in different ways. For example, we've seen people have fake applications. We've seen people have a fake Paytm application on their mobile phone. um, and what they do is, they go to these merchants and show them the application and say, I've made your payment, right? I mean, I had to pay you 604 rupees, and here it is. And this is all happening in the fake application. And so one of the innovations actually that we did to counter something like this was we launched the sound box. I don't know if you've seen that in the market, but it's a very popular device with a lot of merchants. And what that sound box does is it simply says, hey, you've received so much money in your account. So the merchant immediately knows whether it's a kirana store owner or a small shop, or even a bigger multi-chain store. They immediately know they've received the money, and the sound box kind of plays that sound. um, and it actually, a lot of merchants, interestingly, when we've spoken to them, they call the sound box chor pakadne ki device. That's very interesting, right, to see how they refer to the sound box, because it actually helps them. So, and obviously behind the scenes, we have a big, we have a team a cybersecurity team that continuously works on taking down these apps, right? I mean, we make sure that these apps are reported and taken down as quickly as possible. But, just wanted to also call out some of the innovations that we're doing in that space. The other kind of things we've seen is, we've seen, mule accounts, right? Mule merchant accounts, right? Where, sometimes merchants uh, will take uh, will take payments, payment services for a certain, service they want to provide to consumers, but then they end up using it for different things. And, we are very, very vigilant on that. We have a bunch of mechanisms to prevent that from happening, because that defrauds consumers, right? I mean, people go, thinking that they're going to pay for something, but they actually don't get that service, and they lose that money. The other kind of things that, the other two or three big things that we've seen, which actually happen a lot, is, attempts to take over accounts. So, there are people who try to take over accounts of others, and there are a variety of things they do there. Um, you know, uh, so I'll talk about four or five different things that we've done to prevent some of these account takeovers from happening. So we work with Try. So what people often do is, people who are fraudsters, what they try to do is they buy SIMs in bulk, and then because your number is really tied to your, account, your fintech account. They try to download all the fintech apps, and then they try to see if they can log in, because they now have that number. Now these numbers may have been given up by the original users, a few months back, and they may have gone on to different numbers, but fraudsters use this mechanism. So we worked with Try on creating an MNRL list, which basically, shows that these are the set of numbers that have been surrendered over the last few months. And whenever we see another login happen from uh, such numbers, we throw a lot of challenges. We ask the user to take a selfie and verify their selfie, to make sure that the person actually who's trying to, log in through this number is actually the guy who actually, did um, was the original owner of this account. Then, a lot of times frauds happen because, people call up and say, oh, my number has changed, so can you now transfer my, account to this number? And, frauds kind of try to happen via that mechanism. So even there, we've implemented a selfie check, which, verifies that this is actually the same person. We do a lot of verification, and then that helps us catch such things. Another thing on, account takeovers, and it's very, something that happens a lot, is, people use, fish for OTPs, right? They say, hey, you must have received this OTP, this, and, can you give me this OTP? They use all kind of, schemes to get the OTPs from original users. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to get away from OTPs, because that's a big reason for, where fraud happens. And now we've basically used something called, device binding, which basically ties every device to a certain ID. And if we do not receive that ID, we don't allow the login to happen. So, we've kind of tried to eliminate OTPs, not only from a mobile phone, but also when you log into a website, instead of a OTP verification, we now have a QR code verification. So, that also helps, prevent these account takeovers from happening, because that's a big problem area for us. Then you have card takeovers, right, where people try to take over the cards of other users and use them, get the card numbers and use them to go ahead and, uh, you know uh, you know cheat the original owner of the card. Now, in that front, I think, we are implementing something called tokenization of cards, where basically, as a company, we won't be able to store card numbers. In fact, that will be replaced by something called a token. Now, this is a great step by RBI, and we are one of the leading players in ensuring that all cards get tokenized. And, basically means that cards cannot get leaked at all. We get away from that problem forever. And we're very, very closely working with RBI. I think that's been an area where we've made great progress. That will prevent, card takeover. In addition, we also have something called a trust score on cards. There's a metric we calculate on cards, and if we believe, and or if we see that there are transactions happening on these cards which are outside the, metric that we have created for every card, or score that we've created for every card, then we start throwing additional verification steps. Then we start throwing, additional, you know uh, steps that a user has to take to complete the transaction. In addition, we have a
So,
very elaborate.
Manmeet, if I can come in,
Yeah.
I think the list of things which are required to be done is very, very long.
Yes.
And I'm sure some of the audience has already been working on those. But the velocity part is very important. I think the fraudster is becoming faster and faster. And we hear of the story of how the OTP compromise results into withdrawal of cash within the next few minutes because the mule is waiting and the signal goes and the money is withdrawn. I think we have to really look at that kind of speed to deal with the problem. I'll come back to you on this point later. But I wanted to take Rivi's point of view as to how technology can really step into here and do some of the more complicated work at the back end to ensure that people who are in the operational side in managing fraud get the right kind of tools. So, Rivi, would you want to share your perspective?
Thank you. Thank you. Am I audible? Okay.
You are audible, yeah.
Thank you. So, when you look at all these, what we are doing with cybersecurity, we are talking about swim swap, everything. Ultimately, it comes down to somebody stealing the money. And, we are the last person, sitting in the bank trying to, protect the person's money. Now, there are two ways to look at it. You can say fraud is very segmented. 1000 log ko ho gaya hai, it will also happen for, this category. That's one category, way of looking at it. But we can make fraud very personal. It's very individual. Okay, we call it a segment of one. What is segment of one? Just like a human being has a soul, atma, a customer also has an atma. Okay, which is something unique for him. Which says this is the salary he receives, this is the payments he does, this is the school fees he pays, this is the ATMs he visits. That's the segment of one. Okay. Now, once you are able to take signal from everything, that means internet banking, mobile banking, POS, ATM, your remittances, your core banking, everything put together, you can create this customer atma. And then every signal that you receive, you are evaluating with respect to this atma. I mean, when I say atma, please, it's a living entity, not a dead entity. Sorry, it's a living entity. So that's the approach that we take. Once you take that, you are able to respond very quickly, at the same time, trying to reduce the customer friction. Because if you put a generic rule or a scenario which is applicable to 100,000 people, I saw that in South America, I'll put it in India, it will not work. So that's one thing that we do. Now, for doing that, and Nandkumar sir, in the last 2-3 years, what we are seeing is the customer anonymity is increasing. What do you mean by anonymity? Previously the customer would have come to your bank and done all the transaction. Now he's getting buffered by a transaction and a player like a Paytm or a MobiKwik or some other things. Okay, from there I'm getting a single transaction out. Now, I'm not able to get a behavior out of it. Is this a bill he's paying, or is he a restaurant he's visiting? I don't have that. That ensures that my anonymity increases. I'm sitting like completely blind. So this is one problem that we are seeing. Customer anonymity is increasing. Second is, not only that, multiple applications have come, who are leveraging the great things that we have done with UPI, and just like, you said, a lot of applications are leveraging it, and the speed of transactions are also increasing. So these two things, create issues, but since the evaluation is at a customer atma level, if the technology catches up, you are able to handle these things. So this is one category. And then a lot of times we always worry about people coming from outside and doing POS or ATM hack or something like that. But a good majority of those frauds are also insider frauds. People sitting in the bank who have got access to information, perpetuating a fraud within the bank, or taking this intelligence, pushing it somewhere outside, and somebody from Jamtara coming and using my internet banking to hack into that particular guy's account. So these things are also happening. So this is one category. I just wanted to mention that. The second thing that we also need to worry about is we have like my dad was in Navy, so like an aircraft carrier, we have multiple lines of defense, which is you have a cyber security. The aircraft carrier is the bank. Think about it. Multiple lines of defense, and all those guys are defending so that the bank is protected, the money is protected. But sometimes this information is not passed through. People who allow genuine IPs inside, they themselves are perpetuating the fraud. He is running an attack on 20 of my accounts. He's running a mule account syndicate where the guy has collected 50 accounts, more or less the same IP address, and he will log in and act like a regular customer on internet banking. Your device ID is remaining the same, your things are remaining the same. How do you detect it? So this is one category. We are also seeing during COVID a lot of insider initiated mind-blowing kind of activities happening in other, because we operate in 23 countries. We are seeing that wherein you can't even trust. When I was in a foreign country last week, there the problem is in underworld, sorry, in the dark web, people have asked and said, if you are a bank IT person, please join us and we will give you $20,000 per month as salary, so that they can perpetuate all of this. So this is the second category. And to counter this, we are, how do we counter this? And I need to do it really, really fast, really, really fast. And I don't even have time for the core banking to revert back whether the transaction is happening or not. At the same time, I need to do it really cheap. How do I do it cheap? When, let's say, when you are trying to protect, UPI frauds and so on. So now, the thinking that we do with other banks is, I need to even come down to the cost of electricity that is being used to process this. If I don't factor that in, and every transaction is landing me a cost of 4 rupees or 5 rupees using proprietary hardware and technologies, it will not work. You don't have a liberty to do that on a per transaction, per UPI transaction basis. So these are the 2 or 3 things that we are seeing, sir.
No, wonderful. I think that's a very, I would say, insightful view from the trenches, where I think you help a lot of institutions to deal with this problem. And that multi-country view is also useful because I think sometimes we beat ourselves up saying that so many things have to be done, but many times we are doing things better than other countries. So that's a good thing to hear. But I'm worried about the insider angle that you mentioned, and obviously money is one motivator, but one has heard of these things in the past, that even families of insiders have been held to ransom for them to do the bidding of the underworld. And as the gangs become more desperate, we can we should be prepared for that kind of thing. Now, I wanted to pose some questions of my own to the panel, and I thought I will first ask Amit, because he sees the most, I would say, dramatic manifestations of fraud. But Amit, what is your view on what more can be done by the industry to reduce the number of frauds, or if something is happening, how to prevent it, or how to get the victims to not worry so much about the money they had lost, or the processes and so on? You must be seeing them from very close. So what's your view on this?
Sir, Gujarat was first state to start this helpline linked to 100 number. It was called Project Cyber Aswast, and it was inaugurated by the Union Home Minister, and it worked very well. So the idea was that the victim, as soon as he is defrauded, he must call 100 number, and then we had a dedicated team working 24/7, linked to all the nodals of banks and payment gateways. And this setup was made possible with the collaboration of RBI. So we did very well. In fact, 60% of people got at least some of their money back. So that was the record that I saw till a few months back. So this project was working so well that MHA came down and replicated this nationwide in the form of helpline 1930. So this is something that is very practical, and this project is saving crores of rupees every month. In fact, every day also. Right? So this is something that we can really work upon, and we can still improve it further by promoting this idea of golden hour. So as soon as a person is defrauded, he must know the importance of contacting this helpline. So this is one thing, and then we can also look at the each modus operandi and study that and come up with the practical solution. So I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Manmeet ji, but I believe Paytm has tweaked its software such way that it will not work if any desk and team viewer or any remote access tool is active on the phone.
You're absolutely right, Amit. We have actually prevented screen mirroring from happening at all. So the application blocks that from happening.
So this is something beautiful, right? It prevents a lot of crime. But other payment gateways and the banks need to update their softwares, right? So I heard this about core banking and real time action taking, right? But the practical experience that we see on the ground is just horrible, right? For most of the public sector bank, the nodal officer would write to the state of which the bank is to be responded, right? So then the state would pass it down till the bank branch manager. He would reply, and then the email would again go the same way back and get to us. By that time, the money is definitely withdrawn. So there is a lot of difference in terms of performance between financial institutes. So some central agency, and I think I4C, Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center under MHA, is working really fine. But there should be collaboration with all the stakeholders, especially RBI. So this is something that I think can improve.
I think that's very useful to know about the pain points in the system. Uh, I think another thing which one hears is two things. I think I4C is a brilliant development and it's really helping. But as I said, the fraudsters are always ahead and faster than those who are trying to stop them. So the money is generally lost. But money which is also frozen sometimes takes time to go back to the victim. So the victim is actually not relieved of the anxiety that has been caused. So that was one thing about how to speedily revert the money to the victim. Second thing is in terms of deterrence, long-term deterrence, the trials of these cases also take, I think, a very long time. So there is something, probably the capacity building on that side as well needs to improve further. But as you said, the other stakeholders have to also step in to do their job. I also wanted to ask Rivi on the point of more advanced technology tools. Have you seen good applications of AI, machine learning in fraud detection or fraud prevention in your work?
Yes, we see one mythical aspect, where people talk mythically and say, I have AI, but there is no AI. And then there is a truer use of AI. Now the point that, we tell our banks is, and this is based on our experience, a bank based out of, let us somewhere deep South India, whose main customers are cloth merchants, okay, or firecrack set of people. Their behavior is completely different from a bank based, let us say, somewhere in Bombay. Okay, now you cannot put the same AI model in both the places. So if somebody is looking at and say one AI model, one Brahmastra which will hit everyone and take, that doesn't work. And you only get false positive, and you'll find that genuine customers are getting impacted. So what is working is when you have these bank specific models created specifically for the banks. So now what works in bank A is specifically understanding the nature of the customers, the type of the customer, the kind of frauds that have happened, the modus operandi of the fraud that have happened, and so on. And that brings down a lot of false positives. But people generally don't tend to do this because there's a lot of tuning required and so on. So we are educating the banks and saying this is exactly what you need to do because your bank is special. Every bank has an Atma. Every bank is unique. We need to capture that Atma using AI and ML. Once you do that, you are able to get things done specifically considering the nature of the people in that bank. For example, public sector bank will have all types of customers in. When I take to a, let's say, an HDFC bank, it's the profile of customers is different from that. So AI is working, it helps, and it requires continuous tuning. And we work with the bank to tune it and so on. But a lot of people think that like buying software, you buy AI, put it there, and it will do it perpetuity. You don't need to do anything forever, and that doesn't work. That is software. Otherwise, you would not have called it as AI. You need to adjust it. So the answer is, sir, it is working, but the effort required, we need to put a different type of effort to make it work.
Yeah, I'll just add
I
one comment.
like your simile of Atma, though sometimes Atma reminds you of Bhutatma or Pritatma, but I think that uniqueness is something important. Sorry, Manmeet, you were saying something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Rivi said. I think Rivi makes a great point. Number one, ML is specific to a bank and its own Atma or its own pattern of transactions and customers. What we've seen the same thing in Paytm as well. I think what we've done in Paytm, we have a twofold approach to just answer. I'll take 30 seconds. We have a risk engine, which is a combination of two things. There's a bunch of simple rules which track velocity of users making transactions, and based on that, we are able to see deviations very quickly. So just simple rules, right? We know that on these instruments, the typical transaction rate is X, once in a day or once in 2 days. And if we see differences, we quickly catch them. Now that's very effective. And then we supplement that by ML, because then that helps complete the picture. Things that are not so simple to catch by these rules, then you use ML to make that happen. So I think a combination definitely helps.
Yeah, so I also have another question for you, but before that, I wanted to request the audience to put their questions in the chat box. We definitely want to have some time for audience questions. So please put your questions in the chat box. I'll come back to you. Manmeet, I also wanted to ask you about security by design when you are designing new products. Yeah. How do you ensure that in the rapid development, agile development kind of a model? How do you ensure that security is built in right from the beginning? What is your experience?
I think that's a great question, and that's something that we try to continue to get better at. I'll probably try to answer this in two ways. I think one is when we are implementing any new service, there is product design. There are the features that we think about that will help prevent frauds from happening. And I spoke about the device binding stuff that we do, replacing OTPs by device binding and all of that. So that's a product level thinking that we have in the organization. But typically what happens is breaches happen due to lack in the technical implementation or architecture of the product. And there what we've done is we have a bunch of technical design principles that we have in place. For example, encryption of data. Whenever we're architecting or designing a product, making sure that data is always encrypted at rest or in transit, making sure we are using HTTPS for securing data in motion, ensuring that whenever your service is called by anybody, there's an explicit whitelisting mechanism. So everything is disabled by default, and only people who are whitelisted can call you. Using web application firewalls, proxy layers to make sure that DOS, denial of service attacks are prevented. Now, this is one set. Similarly, no logging of sensitive data. These are things we've built into the framework. We redact sensitive information by default. Now, one very cool thing we've done in an organization this big, and in order to scale, right, we had to do that, is whenever a developer checks in any code, any change in any product, what we do is we run a bunch of security checks. We have check marks on our cube that these are third-party tools, security tools. If they find any P0 or P1 security vulnerability just by analyzing the code, we reject the check-in. We do not let that code even get checked in. Forget shipping it. It does not even get checked in until the developer actually fixes it and it is rerun. Those tools are rerun automatically. He cannot ship that code. So, and then we obviously have a bunch of other things we do. In the interest of time, I'll probably, we run VA vulnerability assessments whenever you're about to launch something. We have the top 10 OWASP, vulnerability types are always, they are a mandatory fix before we can ship anything. There is no credentials that can be stored inside the code. Everything is in a vault, which is secure and nobody has access to, and only from that vault can credentials be obtained. So we do these bunch of things to make sure that when we are implementing something, these things are non-negotiables. And the biggest thing is making sure that developers don't have an option. making sure developers don't have an option. They get blocked whenever we notice something like this.
Right. I think that's very useful to know. The more upstream the effort, the better the effects. So I will look at the Q&A questions which have been put in. I think one question is about what kind of technology can prevent cyber crimes. I think it's a very broad question, and as we know, we need people, process, technology, and within technology there are going to be dozens of them to really which will help address the problem. So it's not a single point issue that we need to support. There's a question on quantum computing. Probably I will keep it away because of the lack of scope. I think there is a question on cyber insurance. So, Manmeet, you would have any view on this cyber insurance, as how effective it is to take care of the problem?
So I don't know if we can elaborate on the question a little more. So are we saying insurance against cyber transactions?
Cyber insurance would be about frauds committed electronically, and if the bank is protected against that, it's a fallback arrangement. Of course, it doesn't by itself solve the problem, but insurance providers, when they do the due diligence before they set the premium on your policy, how does it help the bank in that sense?
Rivi, would you have a better maybe perspective on this?
Yeah, so when we talk to a few banks, they will come back and say, I got a insurance plan for my credit card fraud, POS fraud, or ATM frauds, or let's say cybersecurity. I'm thinking it's along the same line. It's well and good, but what is important is once you make a claim, right, for that thing, your next year premium will more than double, and that goes off. So then it becomes, it's better that try to protect your your house on your own. It's just like taking a vaccine for. Government announced the vaccine, and a lot of people said, "I will not take it." And if you don't take it, it will, or you don't take care of yourself, things will go south. So yeah, you can take it as a one-off case to protect it, but long term, unless you have good behavior to back it up by proactive things that you have done internally, that cost will go. No, there is no free lunch in the world.
Right. So the next question is. Can the use of decoys as well as web application firewalls help? So
yes.
Anybody?
I can take that. I think web application firewalls are like just a mandate, right? If you have to protect your service or whatever service you're providing to your consumers, right? The ability to control traffic, block suspicious traffic. I mean, we get that all the time. We get hit by in so many ways. Where we get spammed suddenly from certain IPs. We get thousands and thousands of requests per second, multiple thousands of requests per second. A web application firewall is absolutely mandatory, especially in this age, for you to protect your consumers from, making sure that there is service availability. Because if you don't have that, your services will fall down. You will get hacked because people are persistent. So I think WAF is just a simple, clear mandate that all of us should have. Anybody providing financial services should have.
Right. There is an interesting question about the misuse of QR code for committing frauds and how security can be built around those. So any thoughts on those? Anybody?
So, I would probably love to, hear what. So yeah. So I think one thing that we've seen some of these instances happen where, people have, their fake QR codes. As I said, right, sometimes merchants take, a QR code or a, PG set of keys from us, but they actually use it for something else. And we have seen instances where people have actually been able to, though these are very rare, have been actually able to fool consumers into actually transferring money to their account rather than the actual merchant account. So you could, the person could basically go say, hey, if you scan this QR code, this payment is actually going to go to the merchant from whom you're going to buy this service. But it actually ends up transferring this QR code may be actually linked to this fraudster who may have, fooled the consumer into believing that, this is something that this belongs to the same merchant. So, here we have seen these, and honestly speaking, we are working with authorities on this, but these are difficult to kind of, this is consumer behavior, so it's a little more difficult to here we end up then working with the authorities, really speaking, to make sure that the money is refunded. But yeah, I think it's a great question. I probably don't have a lot more to add here.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, Rivi.
Sorry, not along with this, Amit had mentioned that, we are getting a central repository of all the frauds and so on. So I was just making a suggestion here. See, today our country has a beautiful, unparalleled, gift. We have about 20 to 30 banks in working in the back-end real-time mode. Okay. Now, if DSCI and police or CBI or whatever, we work and you are able to get the data centrally. Okay. We will be in a position to implement it in real time and say, look, you find an account and say this account is having a problem. Somebody in the field reports. We will be able to push it to 30 banks instantly, and we will be able to block all the channels, all transactions across that. So that's one thing. If DSCI can help. There is also a question of convergence of cybersecurity and enterprise fraud, because when I'm talking to head of frauds in multiple countries, they're already talking cybersecurity. The cybersecurity intelligence is not coming in, and then we need to pull that particular thing into it. So then we have we can give wings to Amit and his team, because they are painstakingly threading into important intelligence, and that golden hour. It is not a golden hour for that one particular bank. It becomes a golden hour for all the 30 banks in the country. That kind of thing we'll be able to implement.
No, I think in terms of wish list, this is a very good point. It keeps coming up. More centralized data repositories helping out. In fact, Amit's example of how the email gets forwarded and then comes back with the reply too late is an example of how this decentralized approach, which worked for a physical world, doesn't work for a cyber world. So I wanted to pose the last question from my side to all of you, but I will ask Amit first. So customer awareness is supposed to be the ultimate defense against most of the frauds. So do you have any suggestions in this regard, how it can be done better, Amit?
I think that is the only solution, because what police and other law enforcement do is only the post-mortem, right? So that is the only solution, and every stakeholder has to play a part. So banks, for example, they send a message for every transaction that happens in my bank account. So with that message, it should also say in a very brief sentence that if you have not done this transaction, you can call 1930 immediately and report the crime. So even small innovation like that would create a lot of awareness. Now people really know that OTP is not to be given. So that I think media and other stakeholders have done really well. But now the criminals have taken up a different modus operandi to install remote access tool or something of that sort. So this is an ongoing thing, and we must play our own parts. All the stakeholders have to play a part in creating them.
Right. So I think we are out of time, and we had a great discussion. I think we touched upon most of the aspects of what can be done, what trends are there, what can be done to prevent, what technologies can help, and I'm sure some of the suggestions which came would be taken up by the respective stakeholders. I wanted to thank my panelists for their spending their time and sharing their insights and wisdom. And thanks to everybody. Thanks to the audience for posing some great questions. And back to the DSCI team.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.